My name is Elena, and I have lived long enough to understand that some loves do not walk beside you, they follow you like shadows, moving just a little behind your steps, whispering your name only when the world grows quiet. I was 52 when the wind brought him back into my life, not as a man, but as a memory I had spent years trying to forget, even though forgetting is a gift that never belonged to me. I lived alone near the cliffs of northern Maine in a small house built from old cedar wood and years of loneliness. The sea lived right outside my window, rising and falling like a restless heart, and I used to think that if I listened closely I could hear the voices of those I had lost, but I never heard his, not until the morning everything changed. I was walking along the cliffs wrapped in my old blue shawl, the one he once said made me look like the ocean in winter. The sky was pale and the air sharp, and the kind of wind that pulls at your soul moved through my hair, and that was when I heard it, his name, carried so softly that at first I thought it was only memory, the mind playing tricks, the heart reaching for something it could no longer touch. But then it came again, clearer this time. Michael, the wind said it like a secret, like a confession. And I stopped right there on the edge of everything, my breath tangled with the cold morning air. Michael had been my first and last real love, the kind of love you only survive once. We met when I was young enough to believe that forever was a promise every heart could keep. He was older, quiet, thoughtful, a man who carried storms in his eyes and sunsets in his voice. He taught literature at the local college and used to read poems to me by the sea, his voice blending with the waves until I could not tell where the world ended and he began. I loved him the way tide loves the shore, always returning, always breaking, always hoping for calm. But life does not care for poetry. Life has the habit of taking away the things it gives you, and Michael was no different. He left one cold November morning, taking little more than a worn suitcase and the last of my innocence. He said he needed to find himself. He said love was not enough. He said words I still cannot unhear, and I let him go because I had no other choice. Hearts do not cage what they love, they release it even when it breaks them. I never saw him again, not in flesh, not in life, but I carried him each year like a season inside my chest. When the wind spoke his name that morning, I felt something old and aching rise within me, something I had buried so deep I thought it had turned to dust. I whispered his name back into the cold air, and the wind moved through the tall grass like it was answering me, and for the first time in years I felt him not as memory, but as presence, soft, quiet, almost real. That night I sat by the window watching the waves crash against the dark rocks, the sky heavy with clouds and the air thick with something I could not name, and then I heard it again, not outside this time but inside, like a breath against my ear. Elena, and I felt my skin tremble because it was his voice, the same warmth, the same softness, the same sorrow that used to live between his words. I whispered, "Where are you?" but only the sound of the waves replied. Days passed and the wind kept calling his name, sometimes softly, sometimes like a cry carried from somewhere beyond the world. I began to walk the cliffs every morning, listening, waiting, hoping for a glimpse of something more than sound, maybe a shadow, maybe a sign, maybe a reason why love long dead was waking again inside me with such fierce longing, and each day the ache grew deeper, as if my heart had begun to remember a wound it had once survived. One evening the sky burned gold and red, the sea glowing like molten glass, and I felt him again so strongly that my knees weakened. I sat on the grass, the wind cold against my face, and I spoke aloud something I had never said, not even when he left. "I forgive you," and as the words fell into the air, the wind calmed as if listening, and I felt warmth on my cheek, not from the sun, but something gentler, something that felt like a hand wiping away tears. That night I dreamed of him standing by the sea, his hair silvered by years, his eyes soft with regret. He reached out to me, but before I could touch him the wind pulled him away, and he whispered, "Wait for me," and I woke with the taste of salt on my lips, and my heart pounding like it had been startled awake after a long, long sleep. The next morning the sky was heavy with storm clouds and the wind stronger than ever, pulling at my clothes, my hair, my breath, calling his name over and over like a chant, like a warning, "Michael, Michael, Michael," and I followed the sound down to the cliffs, the sea roaring below, the waves rising like dark hands reaching for the shore, and the air filled with a strange electric sorrow. I stepped close to the edge, and there in the crashing tide I saw something floating, a small wooden box, old, weathered, carved with familiar patterns, the same patterns Michael used to draw on scraps of paper when he thought I was not watching. My hands shook as I pulled it from the water. Inside there were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, all sealed, all worn by time, some written years ago, some only recently, written in a shaky hand, and the first one I opened said, "I am coming home." Tears blurred the ink, and for a moment I felt breathless, because he had been writing all these years, sending words into a world that never let them reach me. He had never forgotten me, not truly, not the way I feared, not the way my lonely heart believed, and I whispered his name into the storm, but there was no answer, only the roar of the sea rising higher and higher against the cliffs. Then I saw it, a newspaper clipping folded small at the bottom of the box. It said, "Michael Hartley found dead near Portland coast, body recovered after sailboat wreck." I felt the world tilt, everything inside me collapsing like an old wall, finally giving way. The sea roared, the sky cracked with lightning, and the wind carried his name like a cry full of grief and longing, and I understood then that the voice calling to me was not memory, not madness, not hope, but a goodbye, a final echo of a love that had tried to return too late. I fell to my knees, the wind circling me like arms that could no longer hold me, whispering his name softer and softer until it sounded like a prayer, and I pressed the letters to my chest, crying for all the years we lost, for all the words unsaid, for all the nights he must have written to me, waiting for an answer that never came. In the days that followed, the wind grew quiet, as if finally at peace, as if having delivered the message it had carried across sea and storm. I kept the letters on my bedside table, reading them each night, letting his voice fill the silent corners of my home, and one evening as I finished the last letter, the wind brushed the window in a soft sigh like a final farewell. I still walk the cliffs each morning, and sometimes when the sky turns the color of sorrow and the air grows heavy with sea salt, I hear it faint, barely there, his name carried by the wind, and each time I close my eyes whisper mine too, so he never walks alone wherever he is now. And that is how love remains, not in flesh, not in presence, but in the wind that speaks the name of the one who once held your heart as gently as the world holds the tide. The days that followed moved through me like slow fading tides, each one pulling a little more of my strength, leaving behind only the soft outline of a woman shaped by memory and longing. I kept walking the cliffs every morning, because that was the place where I still felt closest to him, where the wind still brushed my cheek with the tenderness that once lived in his hands, and where the sea still roared with the same wild ache that lived inside my chest. I began to read his letters one by one, letting his words fill the hollow spaces within me. He wrote with the same gentleness he once carried in his smile, telling me about the years he wandered, the places he traveled, the books he taught, the nights he spent missing me. He wrote that every shore reminded him of my voice, that every storm reminded him of the day he walked away and regretted it so deeply that sometimes he could not breathe through the weight of it. He wrote that he had searched for me many times, but life kept turning him in circles, and by the time he found the courage to return, time had already begun to dim the edges of his strength. One letter said, "I thought I had years left to make things right, but the sea feels different now, heavier, as if it knows something I do not." And when I read those words my heart trembled, because they felt like a man standing at the threshold of the end, waiting for forgiveness, waiting for a sign that he was not forgotten. The last letter in the box was sealed differently, the paper folded with care, as if he had known it would be the final thing his hands ever touched, and when I opened it the words felt like a final breath, written in ink so soft it looked like it might fade if I exhaled too deeply. He said, "Elena, if the sea carries this to you, then it means I could not reach you in this life, but know that my love never left you, it only wandered like I did, searching for its way home." And he ended with a single line that broke me open, "I hope the wind speaks my name to you, so you know I never truly left." After that letter the world grew quieter, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that settles like mist over everything, softening the edges of pain while reminding you that it is still there. I stopped waiting for his voice in the wind, because waiting felt like trying to talk to a ghost, but sometimes when the nights grew long and the moon hung low over the sea, I would hear faint whispers brushing the glass of my window, like a gentle knocking from another world, and each time I heard it I whispered, "Good night, Michael." As months passed, the sea changed again, turning calmer, as if it too had released a sorrow it had been holding. The grass on the cliffs grew taller, brushing against my legs as I walked, and the mornings began to carry a kind of warmth I had not felt in years, not joy, not healing, something quieter, acceptance, the kind that comes when the heart finally understands that grief does not leave, it only learns to sit beside you without breaking you apart each time it breathes. One early autumn morning the sky painted itself in pale gold, and the wind moved softly through my hair like a hand stroking my cheek, and I felt a strange stillness inside me, a sense that something was shifting, not outside, but within, something peaceful, something final. I walked to the edge of the cliffs, the shawl he once loved wrapped around my shoulders, and I carried his letters pressed against my heart, the waves below rising and falling with the same slow rhythm as my breath. I spoke into the wind, not with sadness, but with tenderness. Thank you for returning to me even when you could not stay. Thank you for the years you spent loving me in silence. Thank you for every word you left behind. And as I spoke, the wind rose gently, curling around me, warm, soft, almost like an embrace, and for the first time I did not cry. I simply closed my eyes, letting the air lift the loose strands of my hair, letting the sunlight rest on my face, and in that moment I felt him, not as pain, not as memory, but as peace. The wind whispered his name one last time, so faint I almost missed it, and I whispered mine back, and something inside me settled like a tide finally reaching its shore after years of storm and wandering. That evening the villagers found me sitting on the cliffs, the letters resting gently in my lap, my eyes closed as if I had drifted into a dream that had waited a lifetime for me, and the wind moved softly around me, lifting the edge of my shawl, carrying a quiet warmth that did not belong to the world of the living. They said I looked peaceful, they said I seemed to be listening to something they could not hear, and maybe I was, maybe the wind had spoken my name the way it once spoke his, calling me home, calling me toward him through the soft silver twilight. And now they say that on certain evenings when the tide is high and the wind moves through the tall grass, you can hear two voices carried across the cliffs. One calling softly, the other answering gently, like two souls walking together again, finally unbroken, finally whole. Because love does not end, it learns to change shape, and sometimes it becomes the wind that speaks the name you never stopped holding in your heart.